So today, Katrina and I are here to talk about the new deal for consumers and specifically the provision that is being discussed around the dual quality of foods across the European Union. Katrina, I mean, this is a really interesting topic. It's something that's been widely known in the food industry and I think also perhaps by informed consumers that a product that you perhaps buy in Britain is not the same product in France or in Poland or in Greece, and that food manufacturers produce different variants of the product. I mean, what do you think the rationale is from a food manufacturer's perspective? Why are they producing foods that are of different, not necessarily different quality, but of different recipes across the Union?
Simplistically, at least on the face of it, it's to do with different consumer tastes. I mean, we all have our own food heritage, how we use brands differently, different expectations as to taste, and therefore that's how you end up, at least in principle, with different formulations. Of course, the concern here is that that thinking may extend to providing lower quality products in markets where perhaps you can't charge as much for those products. And there has been a real concern with those Eastern European member states that their consumers are being misled by global branding. So they're being misled into thinking that they are buying this premium global brand when actually they're getting a local formulation which is code for a less good quality version.
Yeah, and I think it's right to say, isn't it, that just because something is cheaper doesn't mean that it's of lower quality. There could be
absolutely
a whole host of reasons why a food product is cheaper to produce in a particular country. It may be the sourcing of raw ingredients, it may be simply because the cost of labour makes it cheaper to produce, but it doesn't mean the quality is any less. No. But I think what's interesting, or what will be interesting if this comes into being, is that food manufacturers now will need to justify why they have got these differences. And you know, from a lawyer's perspective, that actually means being able to evidence that if you were ever challenged.
Yes.
So we would expect to see a much higher level of say research into consumer tastes so that you could justify that actually it's correct that your tomato ketchup, say in Poland, is produced in this particular way versus how it's produced in France. So there is going to be that added burden onto food manufacturers in terms of holding that evidence.
Absolutely, especially in light of the fact that the EU has launched this common methodology along with the actual regulation, which is going to suggest to regulators how they should make those comparisons and where to see differences, how they should be investigating. So that will definitely encourage manufacturers that want to be proactive and get ahead of the game to make sure that everything is in order and they can justify any differences they've got. But the other limb to this is very much going to be about consumer communication, because what they've actually done, or what they're proposing to do, is to add a specific element to the consumer Unfair Practices to Consumers Directive, which will say that it is a misleading action to have different qualities of foods, and that if you induce consumers into a transactional decision, so basically you get them to buy something, this is a misleading action under that directive. So that means that manufacturers, where they do decide to keep different formulations for different markets, are going to have to think about how they avoid being misleading, which means they're going to have to communicate to consumers about what those, well, at least that there is a difference.
I mean, that's going to be immensely challenging, isn't it? Because, to explain to a consumer why their product, their tomato ketchup, has been specifically formulated for that market, and also to do it in a way that is sort of positively promotes the product.
Yes.
And it doesn't sound detrimental, I think will be a real challenge to most marketeers.
It'll be a huge challenge, particularly because we are basically talking, this will affect global brands, and part of the proposition of a global brand is global consistency. It is inherent in the idea. So to then say you need to communicate on local formulations cuts across that effort there is for global brands. So potentially one effect of all of this is that we will see a move away from local formulations, at least within the EU.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I mean, it's the other thing they talk about, of course, is levels of fine. Now,
yes.
The figures that are being bandied about actually follow a lot of the GDPR levels of fine, where they're talking about 4% of global turnover being imposed, which would obviously be huge. I mean, at the moment, these regulations in the UK are implemented through the CPUT regulations, the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading regulations, which, like sort of most regulatory areas, has an unlimited fine. But I think when you've got those types of figures being bandied about, it's clear that a judge is going to be influenced by that, may possibly lead to the introduction of some new sentencing guidelines specifically for, not only dual quality foods, but generally for consumer regulations. But you're likely to see an increase in level of fines being imposed for these type of offences.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Katrina.